My entire family was exiled to the frozen north, and I used my pocket dimension to keep them all alive. But after we were pardoned and returned to the capital, my husband cast me aside in a desolate courtyard for his first love. That night, to make her smile, he set off a whole night of fireworks. A stray spark landed on my courtyard and set it ablaze. Through the locked door, I heard my son run over to put out the fire, only to be stopped by my mother-in-law. If Lydia were your mother, you could use her father's power to restore our family's honor and help you get a position at court. But your birth mother is just the daughter of a disgraced official. She'll only drag you down. The door that could have saved me was never pushed open. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day our family was exiled. This is terrible, ma'am. The master was detained at the palace after court today and hasn't returned. My personal maid, Jenny, came rushing in from outside. I woke with a jolt, the sensation of being burned alive and suffocating still fresh. I gasped for air. The master, detained at the palace? Isn't this the night before the Shen family's downfall 3 years ago? Have I been reborn 3 years in the past? Ma'am, should we send someone to the Duke's Manor to ask what's going on? The Duke's Manor is my family home. My mother is the Emperor's cousin, so she has much easier access to the palace than I do. I shook my head. There's no time. The imperial edict for our family's exile was already on its way. In my past life, the men I sent to my parents' house hadn't even returned before we were all thrown in prison. In my previous life, I remembered a jade pendant my mother gave me before my wedding. She said it was a family heirloom that could save my life in a crisis. I had accidentally discovered its secret, opening a pocket dimension, and at the last minute, I managed to stash some gold, silver, food, and medicine inside. The journey to the frozen north was brutal, but thanks to the things in my space, I managed to keep that pack of ungrateful wolves, the Shen family, alive. This time, however, I had no intention of interfering with their fate. I ordered Jenny, "Go and gather all of my dowry." Jenny was confused. Why would I be taking stock of my dowry when the Shen family was in trouble? What are you waiting for? Go. Yes, I'll go right away. While Jenny went to fetch my dowry chests, I found a pen and paper and wrote a secret letter to my parents. I couldn't trust anyone else, so I summoned Ethan, the personal guard my mother had left me. In the darkness, he knelt below the steps, his face hidden beneath thick, dark lashes. But I knew that besides Jenny, he was the only other person in this entire mansion I could trust. In my past life, Ethan died protecting me on the road to exile. Jenny starved to death in that desolate courtyard. Now that I have a second chance, I have to make sure they have a way out. I placed the secret letter into Ethan's hand, gripping it tightly. You must deliver this letter directly to the Duchess herself. He stared at my hand holding his, gave a slight, stunned nod, and then vanished into the night. By the time he reached my parents' house, the Shen family would likely already be in prison. He wouldn't have to follow me into exile. This time, I could finally protect him. Ma'am, all your dowry is here. In the distance, Jenny entered the courtyard with more than 20 black lacquered chests. When I got married, the Shen family was headed by a minor, 5th-rank official. My father saw potential in Arthur, thinking he was a promising young man from a respectable family, and so he arranged for me to marry down. Who knew that by middle age, Arthur would throw himself headfirst into political infighting? My father warned him repeatedly not to take sides in the struggle for succession, but he secretly grew close to the third prince. Today's disaster was a direct result of that connection. The third prince embezzled the court's famine relief funds, causing the deaths of 30,000 soldiers and civilians in Yuzhou. Because Arthur's role was just to cook the books, he avoided execution, and was sentenced to exile with his entire family instead. I found the jade pendant among my dowry, and was about to transfer all the valuables into my pocket dimension when my mother-in-law rushed in with my sister-in-law, Sarah. Sarah looked at the mountain of my dowry with pure envy. Even after being squandered by the Shen family for years, there was still so much left. Her own dowry, from a much smaller family, wasn't even a tenth of mine. My mother-in-law's voice was sharp. If it weren't for Sarah telling me, I'd have no idea how vicious you are. Your husband has only been detained in the palace, nothing is certain yet, and you're already planning to steal the family's wealth and run away? I sneered and glanced at Sarah, who guiltily lowered her head. Mother-in-law, look closely. This is all from my dowry, gifted to me by my family. What's wrong with me taking stock of my own property? In the past, I was always gentle, obedient, and submissive, constantly mindful of my duties as a daughter-in-law and never talking back. Despite that, she always favored her niece, Sarah, and rarely showed me any kindness. My mother-in-law was momentarily stunned. Then her voice rose. You married into the Shun family, so your dowry naturally belongs to the Shun family. Put it all back in the storehouse immediately, or I'll have my son divorce you when he returns. In the past, whenever I displeased her in the slightest, she would threaten to have me divorced, making me the laughingstock of the capital. The traditional virtues I was taught growing up made me believe that being divorced was worse than death for a woman. But now I immediately asked her, can't we do it now instead of waiting for your son to come back? Just divorce me right now. You. The old woman was so furious she nearly choked. She grabbed Sarah's hand and started shouting, someone come and take these chests away. Don't leave a single one for her. They were nothing but a bunch of thieves. My servants were all part of my dowry from my family's estate. I immediately ordered them to protect my things and not let anyone touch them. In an instant, the Shun family's servants and mine were in a chaotic brawl. I took out my jade pendant, felt a refreshing energy surge through me, rolled up my sleeves, and joined the fight for my dowry. Perhaps sensing the imminent fall of the Shun family, they fought with a desperate frenzy. As I grabbed my things, I secretly funneled them into my pocket dimension. In the end, although my mother-in-law and sister-in-law's people managed to snatch some things, all the most valuable jewelry ended up in my space, enough to keep me comfortable for the rest of my life. During the struggle, I even vented some frustration by landing a few slaps on my sister-in-law and mother-in-law's faces. When everyone finally stopped, their faces were red with handprints, their hair was a mess, and even their sleeves were torn off. Jenny yelled angrily, we're in the capital, in an official's residence. How dare you rob us in broad daylight? How are you any different from bandits? I'm going to the authorities to report you. I placed a hand on Jenny's arm. Let it go. Let them leave. Now wasn't the time to argue over who was right or wrong. I had more important things to do. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law left triumphantly with their stolen treasures, while I took the key to the small storehouse and went to the main warehouse. It held all the grain for the household, as well as some medicinal herbs and tools. I packed them all into my dimension. By the time I came out of the warehouse, the Imperial Guard had already surrounded the mansion. Just like in my previous life, everything happened quickly. The Shun family's assets were seized, and we were all thrown into prison. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were still dividing their loot when the Imperial Guards pinned them down. Not a single treasure was left behind. In the dark Imperial dungeon, my mother-in-law sat on the straw, sighing endlessly. That huge luminous pearl, I've never seen anything like it in my life. It was snatched away before I could even touch it. What a tragedy. Then, remembering something, she glared at me with hatred. It's all your fault, hiding your wealth all this time. My son should have never married you. You bringer of misfortune. If he had married the young lady from the Lin family, she would have protected us all. I leaned against the bars and gave her a lazy glance. Have you forgotten, mother-in-law? You went to their house to propose marriage, but you couldn't even get past their front door. You. Just then, two jailers dragged a heavily injured Arthur back from the torture chamber and threw him into our cell. My mother-in-law cried out, "My son!" and rushed over to him. My sister-in-law and her husband cowered in a corner, too frightened to move. Arthur had been on bad terms with the Minister of Justice. Now that he was in his rival's hands, the minister took the opportunity to torture him severely, leaving him half dead. In my past life, I secretly gave Arthur medicine in prison, caring for him diligently and nursing him back to health before our exile. This time, I was curious to see how he would survive the journey to the frozen north without my help. As the two jailers left, I heard them muttering. There's still a fool kneeling outside the dungeon, insisting he's a guard of the Shun family, and wants to be imprisoned with the rest of them. If I were him, I'd have run away long ago. Why would he come back? My heart sank. A fool? Could it be that Ethan came back? Sure enough, Ethan was thrown into our cell later. He knelt not far from me with a grim face, his back tense. Sarah sneered, "What an idiot." The Emperor clearly ordered all Shin family servants to be sent back to their hometowns. Why didn't you leave? Ethan kept his head down and said nothing. He was stubborn. In the entire Shin household, he only listened to me and Jenny, ignoring everyone else. Sarah muttered, "Insolent dog," under her breath, having made a fool of herself. I looked at Ethan, both angry and helpless, and asked him why he came back. Ethan's voice was deep. "Wherever you are, miss, that is my home." He and Jenny had grown up with me. They were more like my own brother and sister than servants. My heart ached as I pulled him to his feet. "All right, there are no masters and servants here. Don't kneel." As Ethan stood up, he whispered in my ear, "The Duchess said she will make arrangements as soon as possible, and that you should wait for good news. There's hope for a divorce?" This time, the letter I had Ethan deliver to my family was not a plea for my mother to save the Shin family. It was a plea for her to save me. As long as I could get a divorce, I could walk away from this mess completely. I wasn't very old when I first married Arthur, just at that age of budding romance. When I saw that my husband was a proper and gentle man, I fell for him instantly. He was kind and considerate to me as well. I thought that after 20 years of supporting each other as a young couple, even if the passion faded, we would see each other as family. But it was only on my deathbed that I learned that in his heart, I was nothing more than a wicked usurper. Prime Minister Lin was his mentor, and he had known his daughter, Lydia, for a long time. The person Arthur had wanted to marry all along was Lydia, and only Lydia. Now the battered Arthur lay on the ground, groaning in pain, while my mother-in-law could do nothing but cry. She turned her anger on me, blaming me for not taking care of my husband. "Your husband is always so good to you. How can you be so cruel? You haven't even glanced at my son since you got here." Arthur slowly turned his head, his eyes long clouded by power and ambition, looking at me with confusion. "My dear, are you angry with me? In my past life, just a few words of complaint from me became his excuse to abandon me in the desolate courtyard later on. I couldn't be bothered to waste my breath on him. I rolled my eyes and said, 'Save your strength, husband. The worst is yet to come.' I wasn't exaggerating. In a few days, we would all be on the road. It was late autumn now. By the time we set off for the frozen north, the journey would take 2 months. In the dead of winter, the cold could kill. Arthur turned his head away, saying faintly, 'I've dragged you into this. It's only right that you blame me.' What did he hope to hear? That I didn't blame him? That I was willing to start over with him? That would surely ease his conscience. He always used the forgiveness of others to absolve himself of his own mistakes. Later, the jailers brought our meal. A large pot of slop made from spoiled rice and rotten vegetable leaves. The smell alone was enough to make you retch. My mother-in-law took one look and gagged, covering her mouth. "How can anyone eat this? Whoever wants it can have it. I'm not eating it." Sarah and Arthur's brother also shook their heads, refusing to eat. Arthur, propping up his battered body, moved grimly to the food bucket and shakily served himself a bowl. "In the days to come, I fear we won't even have food like this." With that, he began to eat it in large mouthfuls. My mother-in-law watched stunned. Arthur eventually forced a bowl on her, and she ate it with a deep frown. Jenny whispered to me, "Ma'am, let me get you some of the drier parts." Just as she was about to get up, I held her back and shook my head. My pocket dimension was filled with delicacies. Why would I eat pig slop? Arthur personally served me a bowl, his eyes burning. "My dear, we must share our hardships." All eyes in the cell were on me. To avoid arousing suspicion, I took the bowl and pretended to drink. But before it could touch my lips, I accidentally dropped the bowl and collapsed on the ground, retching. "Ma'am." Jenny anxiously patted my back, while Ethan grabbed the bowl and threw it back at Arthur. "Take it away." Sarah and her husband were pinching their noses and struggling to eat the slop. Seeing this, Sarah commented sarcastically, "Still acting like the precious daughter of a duke? You're a prisoner now, just like the rest of us." "Indeed, my dear," her husband added. "Someone as delicate as her might just starve to death before we even reach the northern wastes." Arthur looked at me, his eyes darkening. "Wife, I am so disappointed in you." His tone was like a teacher scolding a student. But I wasn't falling for it. I shot him a glare and returned to Jenny and Ethan's side. With Ethan protecting me, no one dared to bother me. Late that night, I waited until everyone was asleep before secretly taking out some meat buns from my pocket dimension. Ethan was on watch and hadn't slept. I quietly pressed a bun to his lips. His usually calm eyes widened in shock. "Eat up." I smiled at him, then went to wake Jenny. The three of us happily munched on the meat buns in the darkness. I told them it was a special meal my mother had arranged with the guards, and they didn't suspect a thing. Well fed and hydrated, we slept soundly. I didn't even notice Lydia's arrival early the next morning. When I opened my eyes, Lydia was at the bars of the cell, wiping away tears. "Brother Arthur, you must endure this for a little while longer. The third prince is still your backer. One day His Highness will save you." I listened with a cold smile. Lydia's underlying message was for Arthur not to reveal any more of the third prince's activities. Originally, Lydia was supposed to become the third prince's consort. But in my past life, she was assaulted by a ruffian, ruining her reputation, and only Arthur was willing to marry her. He even went so far as to frame me, claiming I hired the attacker, using it as an excuse to demote me to a concubine and lock me away. Arthur gazed deeply at Lydia, his tone earnest. "Put His Highness's mind at ease. Brother Arthur, seeing you hurt like this breaks my heart. I wish I could be the one in here with you. I would take such good care of you." Lydia's words were pointed. She glanced at me and continued, "Even my father is working tirelessly for the Shen family. Yet your wife's family does nothing. To protect themselves, they've abandoned their own daughter. How cold-blooded." I said flatly, "Mississippi Lynn, you're not so cold-blooded, are you? Why didn't you bring your dear Arthur some medicine and food when you came? He's been eating slop for 2 days. The smell, you have no idea." Lydia's face showed disgust, and she unconsciously took 2 steps back. As she left, she dropped a piece of news. In 3 days, we would begin our journey to the frozen north. The night before our departure, my son Leo was also thrown into the Imperial dungeon. He had been studying at an academy out of town, and was arrested by the Imperial Guard. His wife Talia, who was heavily pregnant, was imprisoned with him. This daughter-in-law was originally the daughter of Leo's teacher. They were studying together, and she unexpectedly got pregnant. Because of this, Leo was nearly expelled from the academy, and his teacher was about to force Talia to hang herself. It was I who traveled 1,000 miles to the academy to save my daughter-in-law. Swallowing my pride, I pleaded repeatedly to arrange their marriage. Afterward, my son complained that I shouldn't have promised her the position of his primary wife. He was destined to be a high-ranking official. He should be like his father and marry the daughter of a noble house. Inside the dungeon, the moment my son saw me, he started blaming me. "Mom, how did Dad get beaten so badly? Why didn't you ask Grandma to sort things out?" He said it with such entitlement. Even after 2 lifetimes, seeing the flesh and blood that came from my own body treat me this way, I couldn't suppress the heartache. I said coldly, "Your father embezzled famine relief funds. He's a man who deserves to be cursed by thousands. Even your grandmother can't do anything about it. You shut your mouth." My mother-in-law snapped. "What did my son do it for? Wasn't it to support this whole family?" My son nodded. "Yes, Mom, you shouldn't talk about Dad like that. Which official's hands are clean? My father just had a run of bad luck." A run of bad luck? The 30,000 soldiers and civilians who starved to death in Yuzhou were the ones with bad luck. Cursed to be born in such times. Even now, the Shen family still doesn't see their wrongdoing. I couldn't be bothered to argue with them. Some people are just rotten to the core. Better to think about what to eat with Jenny and Ethan tonight. I suddenly remembered it was the Mid-Autumn Festival, a day for family reunions. With the entire Shen family in the Imperial dungeon, wasn't this a reunion of sorts? At night, I secretly took out a few mooncakes and shared them with Jenny and Ethan. Jenny asked if I should give one to my daughter-in-law, since she was pregnant. Talia was a fragile vine, completely dependent on Leo, with no opinions of her own. In my past life, when I was locked away, she secretly visited me a few times and even brought my baby granddaughter for me to see. I wrapped a mooncake in a handkerchief and gave Jenny a knowing look. Jenny quietly woke Talia and handed her the savory meat mooncake. Talia's eyes lit up at the smell, but her gaze slowly shifted to the sleeping Leo. Jenny whispered, "The madam says if you want the child in your belly to starve to death with you, then go ahead and make a scene." Talia touched her belly, guiltily looked away, and took a bite of the mooncake. I had Jenny watch her finish it and clean up the crumbs before coming back to sleep. In the blink of an eye, the day of our departure for the frozen north arrived. Arthur's wounds, left untreated, had become severely infected. He could only walk with the support of his brother and mother. My mother-in-law, from eating too much slop, suffered from constant stomach pains, and was also barely holding on. In contrast, Jenny, Ethan, and I were all rosy-cheeked and full of energy. Back at the Shun mansion, I had to manage the household. But after this period in the dungeon, where I didn't have to work and ate well, I had actually regained my strength. The officer in charge of our escort was a man named Captain Duan. The other guards all called him Captain. Just as we left the city gates, Arthur secretly slipped a gold bar from his sleeve to Captain Duan. It was a gift from Lydia when she had visited him. Arthur put on a smiling face for the guard, a man from a class he used to despise. "Captain Duan, we'll be in your care on this journey. My mother and I are both ill. Could you possibly find a doctor for us?" Captain Duan narrowed his eyes, snatched the gold bar, and spat viciously at Arthur. "You want a doctor? In your dreams. Do you think I don't know how many lives of the Yuzhou famine victims paid for this gold?" Arthur was stunned. He didn't realize that this Captain Duan was an upright man who couldn't be bribed. Because Arthur had angered the captain, we were forced to travel at a grueling pace for 3 days. Arthur's wounds festered and oozed pus, while my mother-in-law was on the verge of collapsing from diarrhea. Coming down a mountain path, my mother-in-law missed a step and tumbled down 2 stairs. As she fell, she instinctively grabbed Jenny, pulling Jenny down with her. "Jenny! Mother!" Both Arthur and I rushed down. My mother-in-law had actually used Jenny as a cushion, pinning her underneath. Arthur asked, "Mother, are you okay?" She shook her head. "I'm fine. Luckily, I had this wretched maid to break my fall." I stared at my mother-in-law, my patience gone, and kicked her away. "Get off!" My mother-in-law screamed and rolled toward Arthur. Arthur was furious. "How can you be so disrespectful to my mother? You're outrageous." In his anger, he even raised a hand to strike me. But before his hand could fall, Ethan stepped in front of me. Even in shackles, Arthur was no match for him. Jenny had several cuts and scrapes, but thankfully, none were deep. My mother-in-law was still weeping pitifully in Arthur's arms. I slapped her across the face to bring her to her senses. "If anything happens to Jenny, not even your worthless life could pay for it." "Sorry, I'm done pretending." Captain Duan watched with a cold expression, then took a bottle of wound powder from his coat and tossed it at my feet. "Go treat her wounds." Like a dog sniffing out a bone, my mother-in-law scrambled over on her hands and knees, clutching the medicine bottle to her chest. She glared at me hatefully. "If a servant girl dies, she dies. This medicine is for my son." The medicine Captain Duan gave was the most common type. I had no intention of using it on Jenny anyway. But if someone wanted to fight over it, then I was more than happy to oblige. "Ethan," I commanded sharply. Ethan immediately stepped forward and grabbed my mother-in-law by the collar. Seeing this, my son and Arthur rushed to help her. Captain Duan charged in, trying to separate us. A group of people descended into chaos. The farce didn't stop until Captain Duan drew his sword. My mother-in-law's hands were empty as she stared blankly at the spilled wound powder on the ground. Captain Duan sheathed his sword with a contemptuous snort. "Go ahead and fight. Now no one gets to use it." Arthur looked at me heartbroken. "Wife, why have you become so vicious?" Leo seemed surprised that I would clash with his father like this. In his eyes, his parents had always been loving. He hesitated for a moment, then turned to help Arthur up, leaving me with only one sentence. "Mother, how are you any different from a village shrew right now? If you're so ashamed to have me as a mother, why don't you write a letter of severance? From now on, you, Leo, will have nothing to do with me or my family." Leo opened his mouth, then shook his head. "I know you're just angry. If you leave the Shun family, who would take you in? You should just behave yourself." With that, he hurried away with Arthur, not taking my words to heart. Using the excuse of needing to relieve myself, I applied the best healing salve to Jenny's wounds. Jenny started to grow suspicious of how I kept producing these things, asking where they came from. I smiled and said, "Actually, that Captain Duan is one of my family's men. He's the one giving them to me." This time, I wasn't lying. My family had once done a great favor for Captain Duan. In my previous life, he had looked out for me on this same journey. Jenny refused to let me apply the medicine, crying that I shouldn't waste it. "Be good. The road ahead is only going to get harder." My serious tone startled Jenny, and she slowly relaxed her hands. As we traveled north to Yenzhou, the heaviest snow of the winter began to fall. The blizzard trapped us in the city of Liaoqing. The snow blocked the mountain passes, cutting off food supplies. Countless people and livestock starved to death. In my past life, our family only survived because of the food in my pocket dimension. I wonder how they will survive on their own this time. We had just reached the border of Yenzhou when snowflakes began to drift from the sky. I had Jenny and Ethan secretly put on cotton-padded clothes and warm knee guards underneath their clothes. On the outside, they still wore the wide prisoner's robes, but underneath they were snug and warm. The Shuns, however, were shivering so badly from the cold that their pace slowed, earning them several lashes from Captain Duan's whip. We had just settled into the post station in Liaoqing when a blizzard hit, raging and blotting out the sun. At first, it was just a shortage of charcoal. Then food became scarce in the city. Many houses even collapsed under the weight of the snow, leaving people homeless to freeze to death on the streets. Another foodless morning, Arthur sat at the table and slammed his fist down in anger. What is the governor of Yenzhou doing? Does he have to wait until people starve to death before he sends aid? I couldn't help but sneer. "Mr. Shun, why don't you ask the 30,000 souls in Yuzhou how they starved to death? The evil one does in this life will always come back to them in a similar fashion." Arthur's face flushed with shame and anger as he glared at me. "I did it for the third prince's grand plan. Besides, who knows if that many people really died? It could have been a rumor started by the crown prince to bring down the third prince. You are truly hopeless." The young man who once claimed he would dedicate his life to a clean and just world had long since turned into a selfish and cold-blooded corrupt official. During the time we were trapped, I continued to sneak food to Talia every night. The adults could go hungry, but the child was innocent. Ever since Leo ate the last piece of flatbread without leaving her a single bite, Talia no longer seemed to feel guilty about eating alone. But a starving person's nose is the most sensitive. When Leo woke up one morning, he smelled meat buns in the room. He sniffed around like a wild dog and finally discovered the scent was coming from his wife. Leo pried open Talia's mouth and saw remnants of meat inside. "You ate something?" He was like a hungry wolf, his eyes glowing as he stared at his prey. Talia lowered her head. I didn't." Leo slapped her across the face. "Useless thing. Still lying about sneaking food? I could smell you from across the room." He showed no regard for her pregnancy, pushing her to the ground and hitting her several more times. Talia reflexively covered her head, curling up on the floor and whimpering softly. From the way she moved, it seemed she was used to protecting herself like this. "Are you going to talk or not? Where did you get the food?" Talia glanced at me timidly, a tear falling from her eye, and whispered, "My mother-in-law gave it to me. If there were a butcher's knife handy right now, the Shun family would surely want to chop me into pieces to see where I'd hidden the food." Leo's suspicious gaze shifted between me and Talia. Finally, he slapped her again. "Nonsense. Why would my mother starve me and my father for an outsider like you?" "Enough." Captain Duan burst in from the snow-covered outside, a sword held at Leo's throat. "I hate men who hit women more than anything. If you don't want to die, you'll behave." Leo immediately fell silent and backed away. Jenny and I helped Talia up. She was a crying mess. I noticed many bruises on Talia's body, some new, some old. "What happened? Did that bastard Leo hit you?" Talia just kept crying, refusing to tell the truth. Even if she didn't say it, I could guess. Leo had failed the imperial exams multiple times, and in his frustration, he often took it out on Talia by beating her in their room. It was just that this time, we happened to catch him. I quietly asked Talia, "If one day we can return to the capital, would you be willing to divorce him?" Talia frantically shook her head, like a startled rabbit, and hurried back to Leo's side. So be it. Everyone has their own destiny. You can't save someone who won't save themselves. Captain Duan told us that bandits were running rampant in the city lately and warned us to stay out of trouble. Arthur was dismissive, confident that no bandits would dare cause trouble at an official post station. He finally believed it when bandits burst into the room and held a large machete to his neck. Captain Duan and several other guards were injured. The bandits looked around the room, found no food, and then turned their eyes to us women. Talia was hidden behind Arthur and his mother, as she was carrying the Shun family's heir. In the end, a bandit grabbed Sarah and dragged her out. Sarah's face turned pale with fear, and she screamed, "My sister-in-law was a great beauty in her youth and is still prettier than me. Take her, don't take me." I had already smeared dirt on my own and Jenny's faces. A bandit glanced at me. I smiled and said, "Brothers, I'm a middle-aged woman who's already had children. I'm not as fresh as my sister-in-law." When I said the word fresh, I clearly saw the bandit swallow hard. Take her. Sarah didn't know yet that they weren't taking women for their beauty. In my past life, she had betrayed me just like this. Ethan, seeing me captured, fought with the bandits. But he was hampered by his shackles and ultimately died fighting them. Although I survived, I lost Ethan forever. This time, I didn't take Sarah's place. She was dragged away screaming, "Let my wife go." Her husband shouted and rushed forward. The bandits were tall and strong. With just a gentle push, the brother-in-law stumbled onto a blade. Blood slowly seeped from his chest as the long sword plunged into him. The bandit yanked the sword out, and my brother-in-law collapsed. Damn it, what bad luck. Take this woman and let's go. My brother-in-law was dead, and Sarah had been taken away, her fate likely grim. My mother-in-law was so frightened she fell gravely ill, and began speaking nonsense. The emperor's men finally arrived to relieve the siege of Liaoqing, but my mother-in-law didn't live to see the day we left. She tossed and turned for an entire night, and in her final moments, she seemed to regain her clarity. She clutched Arthur's hand, her eyes filled with resentment and regret. "If I had known this would happen, you shouldn't have been so soft back then. If you had used my method, you would have married Lydia by now." Arthur's face was dark as he remained silent. I overheard everything clearly from the side. What was this method my mother-in-law regretted not using? A horrifying thought suddenly occurred to me. In my past life, just as Lydia was about to marry the third prince, a ruffian suddenly appeared and ruined her reputation. Could it be that Arthur was the one who hired that ruffian? That way Lydia would have no choice but to marry him. It all started to make sense. In my past life, my mother-in-law didn't die on the road to exile, so she never mentioned this. Her withered hand slowly fell, and my mother-in-law passed away, her eyes wide open. "Mother! Grandma!" Arthur and Leo knelt on the ground, weeping bitterly, but Talia and I couldn't squeeze out a single tear. My mother-in-law was wrapped in a shabby straw mat and hastily buried in a mass grave, without even a tombstone. Leo was baffled by my coldness. He asked me, "Grandmother was so kind and loving. Why were you always at odds with her, mother?" I retorted, "If you were a woman, would you want a mother-in-law like your grandmother?" Leo was at a loss for words. See, he knew that the favoritism he received was only because he was the eldest grandson of the Shen family. After 3 long months, we finally arrived at the northern wastes. Exiled criminals were required to perform hard labor. Even in the dead of winter, we had to go out to work every day. Arthur, having suffered one blow after another, was at the end of his rope. His body was covered in sores, and even getting out of bed was a struggle. There was no way he could work. In my past life, although I had already healed Arthur's wounds, my heart ached for him as a scholar, and I couldn't bear to let him do heavy labor. Jenny and I shared his workload. But I wouldn't be so foolish this time. Lying in his sickbed, Arthur tactfully asked who could take his place, but no one answered. Leo looked at me expectantly, but I looked down, pretending not to see. Arthur gave a bitter smile. "Fine. Tomorrow, I'll drag this old body out to work." Leo, fearing he'd be called unfilial, had no choice but to agree. I applied a protective balm to Jenny's and Ethan's skin every day, so they didn't develop the severe frostbite that afflicted Leo and the others. I thought Arthur wouldn't survive the winter, But surprisingly, just before the new year, someone arrived from the capital. I recognized the man. He was one of Prime Minister Lin's aides. He not only brought a doctor but also good news for Arthur. That evening at dinner, Arthur, for the first time in a while, joined us at the table. He excitedly told Leo, "Son, we have news from the capital. We'll be able to return home soon." My chopsticks paused. I had just received news from the capital as well, and it seemed quite different from the letter Arthur received. Leo's face lit up at the thought of returning. "Dad, did I hear you right? We can actually go back in our lifetime? We just have to wait for good news from the third prince." In my past life, we spent 2 full years in the northern wastes. It wasn't until the third prince launched a coup and ascended the throne that Arthur was summoned back to the capital. Why was it happening so much earlier this time? Arthur eagerly awaited the day the capital would have a new master. Finally, on the first day of spring, a group of eunuchs arrived at our courtyard with an imperial edict. Arthur smiled and greeted the lead eunuch. Why isn't it the third prince's usual attendant, Eunuch Fu, delivering the decree? The eunuch gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Eunuch Fu couldn't make it. Right. With the new emperor ascending the throne, things must be very busy. Eunuch Fu has probably been promoted to chief steward. The eunuch's smile deepened. Lord Shen, perhaps you should listen to the edict first. The entire Shen family knelt, and I knelt behind them. The eunuch's voice was loud and clear. By the mandate of heaven, the emperor proclaims, the eldest daughter of the ducal house, Lady One, is hereby granted a divorce from her husband, effective immediately. Arthur didn't even hear the rest, he just looked at me in shock. Leo was just as astonished. But I was perfectly calm, because I already knew this was coming. I knelt on the ground and accepted the decree with both hands. I thank His Majesty for His grace. The eunuch smiled at me. Congratulations, Lady One. With this divorce decree, you no longer have to endure the hardships of the north. You may prepare to return to the capital at your convenience. I was no longer a Shen wife, so naturally, I didn't have to share their exile. Mum. Leo called out urgently. Are you really going to abandon Dad and me? How can you save yourself and leave us behind? Since things had come to this, I didn't mind them knowing the truth. I stood up and looked coldly at Arthur. I have never wanted anything more than to divorce your father. It would be best if I never see any of you Shen family members ever again. Arthur's initial confusion suddenly turned into secret delight. Wife, do you know why His Majesty wants us to divorce? A smirk played on Arthur's lips. It's because he is going to arrange a new marriage for me. So, Arthur thought the third prince had already taken the throne. He believed that after our divorce, the new emperor would bestow Lydia upon him in marriage. I just said stop dreaming. For the sake of our past marriage, if you're willing to bow your head, I can offer you the position of a concubine. When we return to the capital, I'll still look after your family and save you from hardship. In my past life, his consideration for old times was to frame my family to curry favor with the third prince. I wasn't about to accept his kind of favor. I raised a hand to stop him. That won't be necessary. It's best we have nothing more to do with each other. Best to avoid getting dragged down with him. Arthur snorted coldly. Since you're so ungrateful, I won't waste any more words on you. The eunuch turned to Arthur. Members of the Shen family, hear the decree. He then took out a second scroll. Arthur was overjoyed and quickly pulled Leo down to kneel. He said to me smugly, just you wait. It must be a pardon from the third prince, no, from the new emperor. The eunuch curled his lip in a sneer. By the mandate of heaven, the emperor proclaims, all persons implicated in the third prince's rebellion are to be executed in the autumn. The more Arthur listened, the colder his heart grew, until he finally collapsed on the ground. This time Leo didn't play the part of the filial son. Instead, he loudly questioned Arthur. Dad, didn't you say the third prince was going to save us? Arthur, overcome with anger and shock, coughed up a mouthful of blood. Leo pounded the floor in regret. We would have been better off not getting involved from the start. I could have gotten a position at court just by relying on my grandfather. The eunuch's sharp voice cut in mockingly, Arthur Shen, accept the decree. With that, he unceremoniously shoved the imperial edict into Arthur's hands. Arthur read it again and again, confirming that it was indeed an order for his execution. He murmured in disbelief. No. How could the third prince lose? I heard his plan. Unless someone knew about it beforehand, it was foolproof. The third prince's plan was indeed flawless. But someone had leaked the entire plan to the crown prince in advance. And that someone was me. That night, I had sent Ethan to my family's estate with a letter. In it, I detailed every step of the third prince's future rebellion and asked my father to pass the information to the crown prince. In return, the crown prince would grant me an imperial divorce decree. On the day of the coup, the third prince was killed by a single arrow from the imperial guards who had been lying in wait. All his followers were sentenced to death, Arthur included. It wasn't until the eunuch had left that Arthur seemed to wake from his dream. He crawled on his knees towards me, having aged decades in an instant. Wife, save me. You were able to get the emperor to grant you a divorce, so you can save me too, right? I stepped back to avoid his touch, my eyes filled with disgust. Ethan, watch the courtyard. Don't let certain people escape. I had to pack for my return to the capital. I had no time to waste on him. Seeing me leave, Arthur screamed desperately. Wife, we were married for 20 years. I was always good to you. How can you be so cold-blooded? If your father is willing to help me, I swear I'll be loyal to your family forever. Look at me. I'm begging you, turn back. I couldn't hear the rest of his words clearly. Arthur kept saying he was good to me, but how had I ever wronged him? When a marriage ends, all you have left is your conscience. It's a pity he didn't have one. Arthur didn't make it to his autumn execution. His health took a sharp decline the moment he received the edict. On New Year's Eve, after composing a final poem for Lydia, he died alone. Meanwhile, Ethan, Jenny, and I were in our room enjoying hot pot, completely unaware. I raised my cup in a toast. A celebration. We'll soon be back in the capital, eating and drinking well again. Jenny giggled. Miss, you're not going to mention all the spicy and savory things we ate on the road? Ethan pursed his lips, the corners of his mouth turning up slightly. That's it. I reached out and pinched Ethan's cheek. Just like that. You should smile more. You never liked to smile, even as a kid. Ethan forced a grin that looked more painful than a grimace. It was 3 days later that Leo discovered Arthur's body. He had been sulking and refusing to see his father all that time. Leo was terrified. He stumbled out of the room, looking completely unhinged. The successive blows had driven him mad. Before I left, I called Talia to my side. Talia, come back to the capital with me. But Talia was resolute. No, I want to stay here and take care of my husband. After how he treated you, you're still willing to stay by his side. If I go back to my parents, my family will surely force me to kill myself. If I go back to the capital with you, I'll have to endure the gossip of others. Staying here is my best option. Talia smiled as she looked at Leo, who was shouting and raving in the courtyard. Years later, I heard news of Leo and Talia again. Captain Duan had been sent to the northern wastes to escort another group of prisoners. As he passed by the old Shin house, he saw Leo sitting on the ground, spouting nonsense. Leo suddenly grabbed Captain Duan's leg. Dad, are you here to take me home? Mr. Shin? Suddenly, a large, sturdy woman came out of the house, holding a stick. Without a word, she started beating Leo with it. Leo screamed in pain but didn't dare to fight back, just covered his head and endured it. Captain Duan looked closely for a while before realizing that the woman was the once delicate Talia. According to the neighbors, Talia beat her husband every single day. Hearing this, I couldn't help but sigh. It was all Leo's own doing. The peach blossoms bloomed once more. The three of us, Jenny, Ethan, and I, traveled south to see the mountains and rivers. The world is vast and beautiful. There's no need to dwell on the past. The end.